Welcome back, everyone, to another Explainer. Today, we have a truly fascinating topic to unpack. We're going to conduct a full-scale forensic investigation into a tool that pretty much every project uses, but almost everyone uses entirely incorrectly. I'm talking about the press release. Just picture the typical scenario for a moment. You or your marketing team spend thousands of dollars on distribution wire fees. You spend weeks agonizing over the draft, going through countless late-night review sessions just to get every single adjective perfect. Then you finally hit publish. And the result? Zero retweets, no media coverage, just absolute silence. Well, we've dug deep into the data to find out what actually makes a press release work in today's fast-paced environment. And honestly, the results are going to completely change how you view your next announcement.
Think about that frustration for a second. What if I told you most Web3 press releases fail before anyone even reads them? Let that sink in. All that time, all that effort, completely wasted before a single journalist or reader even gets past the very first sentence.
So, to figure out why this massive disconnect happens, we didn't just guess, we looked at the hard data. We analyzed exactly 100 anonymized Web3 press releases, all published in a single month, June to be exact. We stripped away the names, we waded through the endless sea of hype, and we manually sifted out all those phrases like revolutionary paradigms and groundbreaking synergies to focus purely on the underlying strategy. And what we found was a clear, undeniable pattern that almost everyone else just completely ignored. By the end of this explainer, you're going to know exactly what separates a press release that people instantly skip from one that people actually remember.
Section 1. Core Thesis: The Myth of Visibility.
Okay, let's dive right into this because everything really starts with a fundamental misunderstanding of how public relations actually works in the modern era. We're dealing with a massive gap between what founders believe and how the world actually operates. The absolute biggest myth in the industry right now is that the simple act of publishing a press release automatically creates visibility. Founders think, hey, I hit publish, therefore people will look. But the reality is completely different. Just publishing doesn't equal visibility. Value equals visibility. Think about a tech journalist's inbox for a second. They're getting pitched upwards of 500 times a day. Hitting publish and hoping they miraculously notice your release is literally like dropping a needle into a haystack and expecting it to shine. PR isn't just about logging an update on the internet. It's about communicating something that people actually care about. If you focus purely on the act of the announcement rather than the intrinsic value of that announcement, you are guaranteed to hear crickets.
Section 2. The Crime Scene: What Most Got Wrong.
Let's move over to the evidence. I actually like to call this the crime scene, because when we looked at the failed majority out of those 100 press releases, we saw the exact same fatal mistakes repeated over and over again. First up, generic headlines. Imagine scrolling and seeing Web3 startup launches platform. It gives absolutely zero reason to click. Second, there was no real news. It was just a project enthusiastically talking about itself in a total vacuum. Third and fourth, these releases were completely bogged down by heavy technical jargon and empty marketing buzzwords. You'd read 3 entire paragraphs and still have no clue what the company actually built, but you'd know for sure it was, quote-unquote, next generation. Fifth, there was absolutely no supporting data to back up their lofty claims. And finally, weak positioning. The readers, and more importantly, the journalists, simply couldn't grasp why the announcement mattered in the grand scheme of things.
And this leads us to the most damning piece of evidence from our study. When you combine all those terrible habits, you realize that most of these press releases looked exactly the same. They read like carbon copies of the last 50 announcements. They're structured exactly the same, they rely on the exact same buzzwords, and they feature the same long, dense, impenetrable paragraphs. When an editor opens an email and sees that familiar wall of generic text, their brain immediately clocks out. They click away in milliseconds. Homogeneity is the absolute enemy of attention. If you sound like everyone else, you are completely invisible.
Section 3. The Winning Pattern: What the Best Did Differently.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it wasn't all bad news. A small minority of these press releases completely broke the mold. They gained incredible traction, they got media coverage, and they generated real engagement. And remember, our goal wasn't just finding the biggest brands, it was identifying the stories that actually worked. When we looked at this small minority, we saw a stark contrast. The highest performing press releases completely abandoned promotional noise. They didn't rely on buzzwords or exaggerated adjectives. Instead, they leaned heavily into informative value. They showed measurable progress. They presented a real story. The strongest releases, quite simply, were not promotional. They were deeply informative. They respected the reader's time.
When we break down that winning pattern, we see some very consistent characteristics. The winners solved a specific problem. They demonstrated measurable progress and backed it up by including real numbers, not just vague promises of future greatness. Let's really look at 2 of these elements.
starting with what actually makes an actual story. An actual story is not just a feature list. It features a protagonist, which is the user. It introduces a conflict, which is the problem the user is facing in the market right now. And it offers a resolution, which is your product. Furthermore, they utilize strong founder quotes. But instead of the usual corporate speak like, "We are thrilled to announce our synergistic integration," the quotes added real credibility and human insight into why the market desperately needed this change. In short, they gave journalists a compelling narrative to write about, instead of making the journalists do all the heavy lifting to find the angle.
Section 4. The plot twist. The underdog surprise.
And this brings us to the most unexpected data point in our entire 100-release study. It's a plot twist that completely changes how we should think about PR budgets and brand size. When we charted out the engagement data, we found that time and time again, smaller, intensely focused projects generated significantly stronger engagement than much larger, heavily funded brands. The underdogs were consistently outperforming the giants. They were getting more reads, more pickup, and more social shares. But, how is that even possible in a space where budget usually dictates volume?
So, the crucial point is this simple equation. Relevance is greater than budget. The smaller projects didn't outspend the big brands. They outsmarted them. Let's say a massive brand blasts a generic press release to 1,000 different media outlets. It's incredibly loud, sure, but it's entirely unfocused and it ultimately ends up ignored. Now compare that to a small project that targets one specific niche publication with a highly relevant data point that completely upends how that niche operates. That small project wins the news cycle. The underdogs told a highly focused story, they published consistently to the exact right people, they strategically distributed their news, and they built real credibility over time. Attention in this space isn't just something you can buy with a massive budget. It is driven purely by relevance and strategic targeting.
Section 5. The High-Performance Blueprint.
So how do we actually put this into practice? We've gathered all these insights into an actionable framework. Before you hit publish on your next announcement, you need to treat these 5 steps as your ultimate non-negotiable checklist, standing between your project and absolute obscurity. 1. Why does this matter? If you can't explain the big picture impact in one clear sentence, rewrite it. 2. Why now? This is all about urgency. If this could have been announced last month or could wait until next month, it's not urgent news. 3. Who actually benefits? Hint, the answer here shouldn't just be our investors or our development team. It needs to be the end user. 4. What is actually new here? Don't disguise a minor bug fix or an old feature update as a groundbreaking launch. And 5. Why should anyone trust this project? Provide the hard data, the partnerships, or the track record. If your press release can clearly and powerfully answer these 5 questions, you're no longer just announcing activity, you are actively building authority in the space.
Section 6. The verdict, positioning over volume.
Which brings us to the final verdict of our forensic investigation. The biggest lesson from analyzing these 100 press releases wasn't about the mechanics of writing or finding the absolute perfect adjectives. It was entirely about positioning over volume. The projects that truly stood out didn't try to sound louder. They sounded more valuable. As this quote perfectly summarizes, and I want you to really let this sink in, visibility without substance fades, but credibility compounds. If you just want a quick spike in visibility, sure, spend a fortune and make some noise. But it's going to fade by tomorrow morning. If you want lasting impact, you have to build substantial credibility, because that is the only thing that compounds over time.
So I leave you with this final, critical question. Will your next press release just be another announcement? Or will it be a story worth reading, sharing, and remembering? The choice and the strategy is entirely yours. If you want to explore more on how strategic PR helps projects build real authority, head over to Web3 Newswire. Be sure to comment data down below if you'd like us to analyze another 100 press releases and reveal even more industry patterns. And don't forget to subscribe for weekly deep dives into long-term visibility strategies. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll
Subscribe and visit Web3 Newswire for visibility and credibility of your Web3 projects.